In this video, I will discuss liberal humanism and then the transition to theory from liberal humanism and then some common recurrent ideas of all the critical theories, which is kind of simplification or generalization of all the literary theories. And what is actually liberal humanism? Well, it is the traditional approach to English studies, and we have discussed the history of literary criticism in the previous video. So understanding that is important for understanding liberal humanism. It is the set of values and attitudes and assumptions about literature, and according to Peter Barry, it formed its half-hidden curriculum. But to understand liberal humanism, we have to understand the rise of English studies, how English developed as an academic subject. Well, if we see that until the first quarter of 19th century, higher studies was the monopoly of the church. Students had to be Anglican communicants and had to attend the college chapel. The teachers had to be unmarried, and the subjects available were classics, divinity, and mathematics. Any Catholic, Jewish, or Methodist or atheist was barred from entry, and any attempt to reform had to face these conservative forces. In 1826, we see first breakthrough that degrees were awarded to men and women of all religions. From 1828, English was offered as a subject, but not as we now know it. It was kind of a language study using literature as examples. English literature as such, as we know now, was first taught at King's College, London, beginning in 1831. F.D. Morris was appointed professor at King's College in 1840, and his inaugural lecture lays down some of the principles of liberal humanism. According to him, the study of English literature would serve to emancipate from the notions and habits which are peculiar to their age, and also that literature was the peculiar property of the middle class and the expression of their values, because for him, the middle class represented the essence of Englishness, and therefore their education should center on English literature. But as we can see, this had a political dimension to it, that people so educated would feel that they belong to England, that they had a country and will not revolt. So it was being seen as kind of a substitute for religion, because religion was declining at that time in England. There was the worry that the lower classes can rebel if they had no religion to teach them morality. Obviously, the ideological control was one of the motives of the founders of English, but there was also a Victorian mixture of class guilt about social inequalities, a genuine desire to improve things for everybody, a kind of missionary zeal to spread culture and enlightenment, and a desire to maintain social stability. So all these were motives of the founders of English studies. But Oxford and Cambridge were suspicious of new subjects of English and held out against it. Oxford until 1894 and Cambridge until 1911. Now there was vigorous discussion and campaigning to establish a chair in English at Oxford. In 1887, the first attempt was defeated largely because of a speech by the professor of history Edward Freeman. Now his speech highlights some of the problems in English studies. He said, "We are told that the study of literature cultivates the taste, educates the sympathies, and enlarges the mind. These are all excellent things. Only we cannot examine tastes and sympathies. Examiners must have technical and positive information to examine. For the time being, literature had to be studied along with language." The English course was finally set up at Oxford in 1894. In Cambridge, after 1911, after the establishment of English course, a group of people teaching there, like I.A. Richards, William Empson, and F.R. Lewis, sought to change things, and we have discussed these three personalities in the previous video. I.A. Richards pioneered the technique called practical criticism, or what is also known as new criticism, which we will discuss later, which is the close study of literature by isolating it from history and context and analyzing only the words on the page. William Empson, who was pupil of I.A. Richards, took this method to its extreme and published a book in 1930 called Seven Types of Ambiguity, and his method kind of anticipated a post-structuralist view of language. F.R. Lewis said that it was a highly disturbing book because it used intelligence on poetry as seriously as if it were mathematics. T.S. Eliot called this lemon squeezer school of criticism. F.R. Lewis is probably the most influential figure in 20th century British criticism, and in 1932 he founded an important journal called Scrutiny, and this extended the close reading method beyond poetry to novel and other material. But his close readings were often lengthy quotations without comments, and he often just paraphrased the text while giving the impression that he was analyzing it. Well, his approach to literature was also overwhelmingly moral. Rene Valek in the 1930s asked him to spell out his principles of criticism more explicitly, to which he refused. So literary studies in the period of its growth claimed independence from language studies, historical considerations, and philosophical questions. And the theory or theories from the 1960s onwards, in essence, re-established the connection between literary studies and these three academic fields. So now I will discuss 10 tenets of liberal humanism outlined by Peter Barry in his book. And these are essentially the unspoken principles or ideas or theories of liberal humanism. So according to them, literature is timeless. That literature is not just for an age, but it is for all the times. It transcends the limitations of that age it was written in. The second is the text is self-sufficient, that the meaning is within the text, within in the words written on the page instead of being in any kind of context, socio-political context, literary historical context, or even autobiographical. And the third is that the text should be detached from the context, and again it should be, and that we should perform the close verbal analysis of the text without any of our prior ideological assumptions or political preconditions. We should try to be kind of objective while reading a text. And fourth is that human nature is essentially unchanging. The same passions and emotions and situations are seen again and again throughout human history. So it means that continuity in literature is better and more significant than innovation and novelty. Fifth is that individuality transcends environmental influences, that individuals are not influenced by the age they live in. Individuality is something which is possessed within each of us as our unique essence, and it transcends society and age. Individuality can change and develop, but it cannot be transformed. As we see, the characters in literature change and develop, but they are not completely transformed. So this is the belief in transcendent subject, means that the individual is above the forces of society, experience, and language. Sixth is that the purpose of literature is to enhance life, to teach us morals and make us better people, and to propagate human values. But it should not be in a programmatic way, that it should not be too overt or direct in its propaganda. It should not be political, as Keats says that we hate poetry that has a palpable design upon us. Seventh is that form and content must be fused in organic way, that the form of the language and the content of the meaning that we are reading, they should be fused in a way that feels natural and not in a way that the form feels like it is thrust upon the content, and vice versa. And literary form should be like a decoration which is applied externally to a complete structure in itself. Like we see in Coleridge's distinction, according to him, the imagery that is detachable from the substance of the work is merely fanciful and not truly imaginative. It needs not be there. It says that sincerity is in the language. Sincerity is truth to experience, honesty towards the self, and human empathy. This is a quality which resides within the language of literature. Sincerity is a quality in literature which is to be discovered within the text, as in the avoidance of cliches, as that there are no over-inflated forms of expression, that there is first-hand individualistic description of things. And ninth is that literature should demonstrate silently an idea and do not tell it explicitly. According to them, ideas in literature are worthless until they are given embodiment in enactment, you can say. Literature must act out the idea that it wants to portray instead of just describing it. For example, if a character just says honesty is important in life and should be observed, that will not have as much of an effect upon us if the character's life portrays that idea through their actions. And through the plot of a text, we get the idea that honesty is important and should be observed. That would be more powerful. And according to liberal humanists, that is what literature should do. And the 10th tenet is that criticism's role is to mediate between reader and text. General theory is not useful in practice, according to them. It gets between the reader and the text. And again, we see that this opposition to ideas, which we saw in the previous tenet, is also present here. They do not want to have just ideas or preconceived ideas. They want the critics to perform criticism to bridge the gap between reader and the text. According to their notion, it seems like that all ideas are preconceived and that they will come between reader and the text. This actually reflects deep English empiricism, which actually goes back to the philosophy of John Locke, that we should only trust what is made evident through direct experience instead of abstract ideas. So those are the 10 tenets of liberal humanism and the essence of liberal humanism. So now let me just discuss the transition of liberal humanism to theory. Now we can think of each theory as a wave which attacks the liberal humanist consensus which was established between 1930s and 50s about literature. In the 1960s, we see that two old but still unarticulated approaches were being developed: Marxist criticism and psychoanalytic criticism. At the same time, there were other two approaches, namely linguistic criticism and the early forms of feminist criticism, which was becoming a significant factor at the end of that decade. Then in 1970s, there were two controversial new critical approaches, in particular structuralism and post-structuralism. And this situation was usually called a crisis or civil war in the discipline of English. These two approaches usually centered on language and philosophy rather than history or context. Now in the 1980s, we see a shift occurred, which is sometimes called the turn to history. So there was a new historicism from the United States and cultural materialism from Britain. And both these approaches take what we can call holistic approach to literature. That is, that they at the same time maintain some of the insights of structuralists and post-structuralists and also integrate literary and historical study. So they are kind of combining all the other theories. And finally, in the 1990s, we move away from the overarching grand explanations and we see post-colonialism structuralism, postmodernism, the later waves of feminism, or you can say gender studies, and there was also black feminist criticism, African American criticism, and these all theories are what will form the content of the upcoming videos. And now let's move on to some of the recurrent ideas in critical theory. Now obviously all the critical theories have their own separate tradition and histories, but several ideas are recurrent in each and seem to form its common bedrock. And obviously these ideas are oversimplification, but our minds grasp the simplified version of things, so understanding the simplification can then help us understanding the complex details and specifics of each theory. So this section of the video is very important. So there are 5 common recurrent ideas in all the critical theories. Number 1 is, according to them, so-called truths are socially constructed. What does that mean is that most of the ideas that we usually take for granted are not actually truth, and they are socially constructed, that they depend upon some specific social and political force and on the shifting ways of how we see and think. And they are not absolutes, means they are not fixed or immutable. They are contingent, means they are temporary or provisional. And this position which theory attacks is essentialism, and most of the theories take the position which is called anti-essentialist position. Number 2 is that there is no disinterested inquiry of anything. We humans live in particular time and place, and our environment influences us, and the way we see the world is according to that influence. So all the thinking and investigation is necessarily affected by our prior ideological assumptions or commitment. So there is no objective inquiry or disinterested inquiry of anything. Whenever there is a practical procedure, it has some kind of a theoretical perspective behind it, according to which that procedure is being performed. And according to them, if we deny that we have a theoretical position, it's like saying that our view is the commonsensical view and the objective view, and there is no theoretical assumptions behind my view. But there is obviously the problem with this point is that if all these theories say that there is no objective criteria and there is no disinterested inquiry, then it means that they introduce a kind of relativism which also disables and cuts the ground of their argument as well. Third point is that language constructs reality. That language just does not record reality, it shapes and creates it. And this is more prominent in the theory of post-structuralism and deconstruction. The language is not a neutral medium, it charges everything with meanings. And with that, they also say that meaning is created or constructed by reader and writer both. So meaning is not just there waiting for to be discovered, but reader's contribution is also there, which brings that meaning into being. Then a fourth point is that meanings are never fixed. As we said, the language constitutes our reality. That also implies that meanings are never fixed, which means that there is no definite reading or definite meaning of a text, and trying to discover a definite meaning would be futile, because language generates infinite number of meanings, and especially according to post-structuralist, all texts are necessarily self-contradictory. So there is no final meaning of any text or definitive meaning of any text. Fifth is that there is always a distrust of totalizing ideas and totalizing explanation of things. So according to them, whenever we try to give a generalized idea of something or the explanation which fits all the sizes, that is wrong, and they distrust that idea. For example, the concept of human nature as a generalized norm which transcends the idea of particular race, gender, or class is to be distrusted, because it usually in practice is Eurocentric view. Human nature is actually according to the European view of human nature. They see human nature as they themselves are, and then they generalize that idea and totalize that idea upon to every other human being belonging to different races, genders, and classes. And according to different theories, this is also androcentric. That is, it is based on masculine norms and attitudes. So in summary, these 5 points are that politics is pervasive, that we cannot escape our ideological commitments and be neutral, and that language is constitutive, means that it just does not record reality, it creates and constructs it. And that truth is provisional, means that there is no fixed truth. All knowledge is contingent and changes. And that meaning is also contingent, that meaning is never fixed or stable, it always shifts and is context dependent. And human nature is a myth, means that the idea of universal human nature, it is usually a Eurocentric and androcentric assumption about human nature. And that is the end of this video. And the next I will start discussing with the first theory of ours, Russian formalism.